This is episode 73. I'm speaking to Yael Sunshine and how she integrates Dharma into her classes. Let's listen. I also have an opportunity for you. Harsha Yoga is offering an online course to teach you or expand your knowledge in the area of accessible yoga for pregnant women. And it is available now, and you can sign up at http://bit.ly/Harsha, and that's HERSHA, all caps. And if you put in this code when you are paying for the course, you will receive 15% off. So the code is CFOYHERSHA. Again, all caps. So that may be an opportunity for those of you that want to learn or to expand your knowledge about providing accessible yoga for pregnant women. Hello, and welcome to Change the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies. I'm very excited to be talking to lots of yoga teachers who will explain their passion for teaching yoga to students with different ages, physical fitness levels, wellness levels, and different goals. They will explain the benefits of yoga for these students and will be including teacher tips and pose modifications. I am Stephanie Cunningham of Yoga Lightness, and I've been teaching over 50s for 10 years. So this area is my passion and the passion of many other yoga teachers that you will be listening to in this series. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get started. This is Stephanie Cunningham with Changing the Face of Yoga. And I have asked my guest to come back. She originally was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and her name is Yael Sunshine. And Yael is a yoga teacher and a yoga therapist. And when we talked before, Yael talked about adding Dharma to her classes, and specifically in this case to her classes for people who are recovering or in treatment for breast cancer. And so I was really fascinated about how you might do that. And Yael has very graciously agreed to talk to us about that. So welcome, Yael. And is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, that was great. Thanks, Stephanie.
Okay, thanks. Let's start really basic and say, what is your definition of Dharma?
Okay, so the classic definition of Dharma would be actually universal laws, universal principles. There's a certain kind of harmony that's within the universe, and Dharma would be being attached or connected to those. And when we're connected to those, we are actually free from the effects of karma. It's like we have a deep knowing of the right way to go and how to connect to something bigger. That might be a hopefully good explanation of Dharma.
Okay, great. Thank you. So when you talked before, you were talking specifically about Dharma in your classes for breast cancer patients. And I think although I certainly agree with your definition, I think it might be helpful to bring it down to specifics. So
right.
What exactly do you look for when I assume you're doing different precepts, shall we say, in your class? What are you looking for that you think might help someone who's in this really difficult situation?
Okay. When I design a class or I'm doing therapeutic yoga, I work on a model called the 5 kosha model. And the 5 koshas are called the 5 sheaths or the 5 bodies. And they're your physical body, your energy body, they're your emotional mental body, and then the quality of your thoughts, quality of your mind, and finally connection to spirit or to universal consciousness. So, we get a complete picture. So one of the parts of the picture that I'm looking at when I'm working with people with cancer is what's happening in their emotional body, what's showing up in their life because of this diagnosis. So obviously, it's not like someone saying you have a broken leg and we're going to put it in a cast, and after 6 weeks, we'll take off the cast. And, you might notice it when the weather's bad, but otherwise you're good to go, right? So people with a cancer diagnosis are usually dealing with tremendous fear because the future becomes unknown. And I think besides the fear, there's also what a lot of my students have told me is sometimes they feel a little like it's hard for them to be authentic to what their choices are about their own treatment. That sometimes the choices are overwhelming. Sometimes there's a lot of pressure from family members. And then again, sometimes there's a lot of fear, like what they're intuitively thinking will help, or what they really just want to do as their journey to wellness or their journey in cancer is not always what's being supported around them. So I really want to work feeding that part of them, their emotional body, their sense of deep connection to self, so that self can be the guide to how to navigate the illness. So Dharma talks then are going to be about that. Like maybe I'm going to be addressing fear. Maybe I'm going to be addressing surrender, standing in self, like really what does it feel like to ground in self and then let self bring us somewhere versus, mind, what we think something should be, what we think we need to conform to. What's our authentic truth? So sometimes I'll use the yamas and the niyamas, which are 10 precepts in yoga that help us connect to a bigger, I think that the precepts of the yamas and the niyamas, which are things like truthfulness and, purity, nonviolence, those are all precepts that actually help us connect to Dharma, right? This universal consciousness. So that's what I'm concerned with giving they're my students, but they are cancer patients. So they're my students. I really want to give them that. I want to give them a lot more tools in their toolbox. And I want to make a relationship between a concept and an idea and how that concept and idea can be felt in the body.
Okay. I understand that. I'm sure that it'd be very difficult to go against the, shall we say, accepted medical treatment for cancer and to be so connected to yourself that you felt that your body, your being is telling you to do something different. Is that a possibility, or is it really that they're already in treatment and they're just trying to cope with it?
I think it depends on the individual. Every single person is different. So, some people are, whatever their doctors say, and they have total trust in their doctor, and that's what they want to do. Some people weigh things out and feel like what makes sense for them. Some people, might have such a bad physical response to some treatment that they decide they don't want to go on with the treatment. So my job isn't in any way to direct those decisions. And my job, I'm looking at it as an offering. Here's some ideas. Here's some principles. Perhaps will assist in this journey. That's kind of how I'm looking at it.
Great. Okay. I understand that better then. Thank you.
No, it's not my place to make any judgment for anyone. I just, that is individual and that's for each person. It's really just my job to go, here's some more tools that you might need. Maybe this is going to give you some comfort, or it's going to help you have clarity, or it's going to help you feel more grounded or less fearful, calmer. Maybe it'll help you feel more joy. Whatever that is, I'm just going to offer something that I hope will enhance and enrich that person's experience.
All right. So how do you specifically weave the Dharma into the classes? I mean, asanas, pranayama, meditation, journaling, I don't know. I just thought I'd like to just get some specifics there so people can think about it when they're teaching.
Okay. So let's say we're doing Ahimsa, which is nonviolence, right? Mm-hmm. So we might talk about the violent things that we say to ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. What's all that level of judgment that we can have? Like, what's our self-talk? So maybe we're going to be talking about nonviolence in that class. And then we're going to talk about throughout the class, just come down and watch your self-talk and notice the quality of it And if you notice that perhaps there's a lot of judgment and you're kind of violent with yourself, can you just stop? And if nothing else, just come into being, like, I don't know. Can you ask yourself, is that true? And so it might be that we're just going along, and then there's also just violence with the body. Am I pushing myself? Am I pushing myself so hard I could injure myself? Am I not listening to the wisdom of my body? Or even sometimes violence to the body can actually be, I'm not really giving myself enough, right? I'm like kind of just like laying back in my practice, like, I'm coasting instead of exploring as deeply as I can. So it might be that we have the Dharma talk about nonviolence, and then they're given something to think about during the practice. And then as we go in the practice, we'll pause. And in that pause, it might be just come back, observe your experience. Are you being as kind to yourself as you can right now? What's the nature of your thinking? And it could just be a little pause, and then we move on and we keep coming back to it.
Okay. I have talked to other people who have had cancer and have read things about it. And they say that sometimes they get a sense of betrayal, that their body has betrayed them. Would this kind of fit in with your Ahimsa thinking, that it's a very angry kind of emotion, I would think? And how do they get beyond that if they can, if they want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be hard not to feel that way about the body, and then maybe that's about talking about compassion. What does my body need right now? What do I need right now? What's the thing that like most is going to nurture me? What's going to most nurture my body? So yes, notice the betrayal. Sometimes we have to find a place to hold two emotions that might seem quite contradictory. In a way, that's what Pratyhara is, right? In yoga, right? Withdrawal of the senses. I always kind of feel like Pratyhara is a little bit not being so swayed by those things. So yeah, we could say it's not being swayed by the input that our body's getting and what our senses are doing and how we're responding. But, it's sort of also, to me, it's a little bit coming to a place of equanimity, So sometimes just saying, maybe you feel really betrayed about what your body's done, can be very liberating to be able to talk about it in the class, before we start working, because sometimes there's not enough room for the negative emotions with the diagnosis. So just giving people some chance to look at it and know it's okay to be examining it and owning that that's happening, sometimes that in and of itself can be liberating.
It must be a horrible roller coaster ride of emotions and treatments, and that has physical results and all of that. It must be a very difficult place to find equanimity, I would think.
Yeah, I think it's probably really, really hard. So I think if we can even just come to a place of like really accepting the completely just accepting the emotions, because sometimes we kind of like should on ourselves, right? With our emotions, and then that makes it actually a lot more difficult. So just to say, hey, it's okay, you're feeling this. But what's interesting, I know that like this would be an example. I also do a little bit, sometimes I go off the beaten path from a traditional yoga class, and I think that other somatic experiences could be really important. And I remember one time we were doing more a kind of dance movement where they got to embody different experiences. So one was like they were walking on a runway and just being their gorgeous self. So like, like, okay, you're going to walk and like, we're all going to clap for you. But like there's a lot of great camaraderie in the class. So, just to actually, when you feel like your body's been hacked up, and then to just pretend you're walking on a runway and I am beautiful is a really healing place to inhabit, right? Because there's so much stuff about what's happening with the body. But I remember once, so I led them to this thing where we were just doing movements that were about anger. And I said to them, just say, get your hands off me. Get your hands off me. I can't even tell you what happened in the room when they had that opportunity to say that. Because, you're being poked, you're being prodded, you're being touched, by so many people. And you can't really, right? Like socially, we can't say that. Have that opportunity in the room where they could like actually kick their feet Like stamp their feet and stamp their heels and go, get your hands off me. They loved it. Boy, was there a lot of talk about that. So sometimes it's also just kind of, I would say, the Dharma sometimes isn't even always what we talked about. Or maybe the thing we talked about that day was we're going to move some things through your body. Just notice how you're feeling today. Like the Dharma is just like, can I completely inhabit and experience what I'm feeling? And then to target it to these shadow emotions that, you don't want to own or that are really difficult with the diagnosis, and give them some space to express those really negative feelings that, aren't so socially acceptable. Like you can't really go to your doctor when they're touching you, like, get your hands off. To actually be thinking it, right? So it can give some ownership back, and that ownership of the experience and the negative part of the experience can be kind of liberating also. So maybe I went a little off, but I think what I'm trying to talk about is finding an emotional authenticity in the practice.
No, I think that's great. I love this. It's really going deep into a subject, and sometimes we don't have time for that in a podcast. So I really appreciate your authenticity in actually expressing and letting us know how you can use Dharma so compassionately and so well. The only other thing I would really like to talk about, and then we can, go off, is you told me at one time that you have no idea who will come to your class because it is I believe it is within a hospital setting, but it is definitely people who are in treatment also, and, may have, because of that treatment, may be unable to really participate fully in a physical class, but maybe there for other reasons. And so how do you, obviously we all know how to modify, but if you have a class that you weren't quite expecting, do you then modify your Dharma also?
Yes, but it's very intuitive. So usually I have no idea who's going to come. Like some days I have 3 people who are post-surgery, someone who's just had surgery and is having chemo and and then someone else with radiation. And then there's 2 people who are in total remission, feel great, could do a vigorous class. You're like a little from all the columns. So usually the way I start class is ask people how they're feeling. How's their energy today? Is there anything I need to know about their energy or their bodies or their treatment today? And I'll even ask them, what kind of practice are you looking for today? And based on that, you kind of have to pull the practice out of your, back pocket, your hat, because you never know who's walking. And I would also say that, I think that one quality most yoga teachers have is we feel the energy in the room. We've been doing it a while. We kind of know. We kind of come in and you're like, oh yeah, we can really move tonight. And other times oh, we need to go into restorative. So I would say that yes, intuitively, I might tweak how I'm giving the Dharma over depending on how I feel the energy.
Okay. I think you brought up a really good point though, which is how much our teaching may depend on our intuition and what we're feeling and what we're noticing in the room, which is really part of really being with your students and able to intuit, shall we say, I think that's a word, what they need. And is there any way other than just sheer experience that we can cultivate that particular aspect of teaching, that from your opinion, from your experience?
It's an interesting question, because I remember someone once saying to me that intuition is just a lot of experience, that it's like you've just done it so many times that you now pick it up quickly. You don't need, it's like, boop, snap of a finger, you kind of know what's happening, right? So I think there's many layers to teaching. We need to know what are the possible issues that our students are coming in with. So, with cancer, they could have ports, right? Where's the port? They might have had surgery and movements impaired, right? They might be really dizzy from chemo. They might be exhausted from radiation, right? So we kind of know what, we kind of already have, like, say, the fabric that we know we're going to work with, or possible things that could be happening with that. That's why I ask questions when everyone comes in, because that lets me kind of decide what the spices are that day. Like if I'm cooking a recipe. I think for younger teachers, it pays to ask questions, and it's really important to observe. As we observe, we kind of know if we're going in the right way or not. And then I think you also just have to have some practices that are in your back pocket that you've kind of created. You kind of know when this kind of situation's coming up, these things work well, So it's a little combination of intuition, experience, pre-planning. Like I remember when I was first becoming a yoga teacher, my teacher, I love this. She was like, you're going to buy a notebook and you are going to write, practices out. And you are going to write, 1 to 7 practices, like a full class a day. Like you want to get hundreds of practices just thinking about your flow and what are you aiming for. And it seems like a kind of wild exercise, but it's not, because you really start to understand this kind of energy. There's like, there's a physical trajectory, like maybe sometimes you're asking what's the final pose, and I'm just building to get to a final pose, right? And other times it's really what's the state of being that I want people to feel, or the emotion. Like some classes are like, let's find joy, let's find calm, let's find courage, And so building those, we're going to also sequence a class differently, right? Mm-hmm. So I would say that some of it's pre-planning and a lot of it's experience, and a lot of it's also, we've all done this as teachers. You have something planned. You're so excited you're going to teach this class today. And then who's in the room? Can't teach. You have to throw it out the window. Yes. It's like, no, that's not going to work at all today. No. Right? Like, no. So like, I was right. Because we've all had that happen where it's like, whoa, nope. But I think that's, some of that's the path a younger teacher's going to have to go on. They have to acquire that skill. And then I think that as an older teacher, we just have to get responsible to really plan something enough, because sometimes as an older teacher, we can get very intuitive, right? Mm-hmm. Or I don't mean older, like, I'm 90, but I mean,
experienced.
I hope at 90 that I am still here on the planet and still teaching yoga, but I meant experienced. Yes. Okay.
But I think
I don't know if did that answer or not?
No, it did. It's great. I'm just kind of exploring it. I don't have any preconceived ideas of what I should come up with. So you're following along well. But I think there's the other end of that, which the experienced teachers maybe relying too much on their experience, and they can just whip off a class without even thinking about it, What I've really liked about what you've said is your depth of thought about what you're trying to achieve for this particular class, but most likely for all of your classes, that it isn't just a yoga class and we meet on Tuesday at 2:30 in the afternoon, but rather, how can I get this other kind of precept across to assist them in whatever way that they need? And I think you do need to do a lot of thinking and planning to do that. And I think that might be something that older teachers, experienced teachers, may not do, because there is so much experience that they can call on. And I'm not
100%. And I'm guilty of that as other people, but I also know that when I really sit down and go, what do I want to give over this month? What's the structure I want to go through? Okay, how am I going to arc it for the next 4 weeks? When I think about it that way, I think I give better classes, and it doesn't. Okay, so I am going to make a little caveat here, because my background also is as an educator, so as an educator, I had to learn curriculum mapping, right? So that can come in really handy when you're teaching a class if you want to go deeper. like I'm creating a program right now and kind of thinking about how am I going to go from point A to point D? How am I going to get them there physically? How am I going to get them there through the meditation? How am I going to get them there through the pranayama? Those are all questions that are really important things for a yoga teacher or a yoga therapist to ask, right?
Right.
And it's also know your audience. So I'm going to say this too. When you start to have regular students in a class, it's very different when you don't have regulars. But when you have regulars, you start to actually know where you can go and where you can't go with them. And also what might be most effective for them. I mean, this would be an example, like when I was training to be a yoga therapist and I was working with a mentor and I was working with someone who was in like a severe depression, and she recommended a certain mantra, like a kind of chanting. And I thought, okay, let's try it. And I tried it and I didn't feel that my student or client was responding and receiving it as well as I would have liked. And then I really thought about this client who is an amazing singer and has this incredible voice, loves like ecstatic chanting and singing. And I went, And I just thought about it and realized there was another chant, the actual melodic way that chant is chanted. I thought that it would be deeper for them. And they're also a dancer, and the particular way that you were doing this, I thought also was going to appeal to their body more. And I remember just like, turning on the music. Okay, we're chanting to this. And we were done. And she's like, can we do this every day? Like, will you come to my house and do this with me every day? So like, it's also like starting to learn the nature of the person you're working with. So obviously that's one-on-one, but even your class starts to have a character as a group.
Yes.
And you start to know who's your group.
Yeah.
Most of the women I'm working with are postmenopausal. And it's not all, but a good amount of them. And I would say that would be very different than perhaps working with someone with cancer who's in their 20s. Because I think that there's different concerns and different issues that might come up. So we also have to look at some of that stuff and so I would say especially if you were doing a therapeutic yoga class and we're hoping for some level of consistency, to really start knowing who's in the class with us. And what have we noticed they respond to the most? What do we notice about times when we maybe offer something and there's some resistance? And truthfully, sometimes giving someone something that they might resist a little, sometimes it can actually be the medicine they need if you respect the resistance. Like that offer might be somewhere they need to go, they're afraid to go. So can you gently offer something that there's a little resistance around? So sometimes it's warranted, and sometimes it's like, no, that's actually going to be too painful. We're not going to go there. And I would say that's something that we just learn as teachers to watch, like who's in the room with me? What do I know about them?
Yes, I agree. In thinking about how I teach and what you've been talking about, I realize that I am much too focused on the therapeutic benefits of keeping people mobile and independent, whereas I could be doing a bit more about the emotional issues that you have as you grow old, because you have emotional issues that are probably for any age group, and they may be slightly different. But I'm just really, I learned quite a bit from this podcast, and I really want to thank you, Yael. That's an amazing thing to be able to do, given that this is just supposed to be a lighthearted conversation.
Yeah, it doesn't feel so lighthearted today. I'm sorry. It feels like kind of a really lasered, intense conversation. But, unfortunately, a cancer diagnosis is an intense diagnosis, right? But I do think this idea of Dharma, and, for me also, to be honest, Stephanie, like I think the 5 koshas is an amazing way to figure out a practice for someone. Because I feel like if I'm hitting all 5 koshas, I'm most likely doing the most healing practice for them, and that I'm seeing them as a whole person.
Yes, I agree. I think that's an excellent way to organize your thinking and your class. because I think I've been really a bit remiss on a few of the more esoteric, well, they're not esoteric, but the few of the more emotional, mental kinds of koshas. I'm going to have to think about that, to be honest with you.
And I guess the other thing always to ask is what's pressing. I remember once I was seeing a homeopath for a while, and he said to me, so for a long time, like years and years using homeopathy. And I said to him, well, how do you decide on the remedy? And he goes, sometimes there's actually 5 remedies I know the person needs. And I know we're going to get to all of them, but I take the most pressing issue first. Because when the pressing issue starts to resolve, I can go into the deeper issues. So that's also the question I ask a lot in designing a class and even in Dharma. What's the pressing issue?
Yes, I would agree. Sometimes my pressing issue will be grief. As you get older, you lose more and more of your friends and your family. And it's, and it's one of those, it took me a while to realize it also comes back annually because there's these anniversaries that people have to get through. And so sometimes we have just done grief. So sometimes I do it. Sometimes I'm kind of catching on to these things, but
and then also with aging, unfortunately, the other thing that we have in our society that I think is such a tragedy is that such tremendous wisdom with age, and we don't respect that enough in our society, and we don't look at elders with the respect that they deserve and with the questioning like, what wise thing can you give me? Imparting of wisdom is a lot of wonderful purpose that we can give to an elder, right?
Yes.
And then we used to also have extended families where 3 or 4 generations were living together. And, so somebody died, you're still with the extended family. You still have that comfort family. And we don't live like that anymore. So there's a lot more isolation in aging.
There is. And social isolation is a tremendous health concern, both public health and individual health. So it's I think that's a lot of reason why many of my students really liked yoga, because they got together and we would go out for coffee, and it really made kind of, not that they weren't doing other things, because they were, but it was basically just a really relaxed sharing kind of activity. So yes, well, that's enough about me, but well, I really want to tell you how much I've appreciated this. I think it was a great podcast. We talked about some really serious things, but in a teaching kind of way to help other people kind of see how you put your classes together, see how they might like to put theirs together, and how you can actually start using those precepts of yoga to enhance and deepen the experience of yoga. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I feel very honored to be doing this with you, and I hope that this was of service and can be of service to people.
I'm sure that it will be. So thank you again.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you for that wonderful interview. If you would like to be a guest on Changing the Face of Yoga, please go to my website, www.yogalightness.com.au, and under the Changing the Face of Yoga tab, you can complete Be Our Guest form. After reviewing the form and finding it applicable to this podcast, we will send you a link to schedule an interview. Please download, review, and tell your friends of any podcasts that are of interest to you and to them. If you would like to contact me, send an email to info@yogalightness.com.au. And thank you for listening to Changing the Face of Yoga.